Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on Thursday, February the 12th, 2015. And I've got to tell you, I don't know what really or even how to approach what I have to talk about because there's been so much coming in that all of you have been sending me that I don't really know where to start nor even what dots to connect. But this has really been a huge week with Russia, the Ukraine, Germany, and France. You saw President Hollande and Chancellor Merkel just almost it seemed like at the last minute going to Kiev, then on to Moscow, and then of course Chancellor Merkel earlier this week came to this country and gave that very, very strange press conference. So today, just today, Zero Hedge is reporting the following statement from U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry. Now, I want you to listen. I'm going to read this whole thing because this is John Kerry's statement, followed by Zero Hedge. And then I'm going to try and put some other context into this for you because it's been a strange week. All right, here's what the Secretary of State said. Quote, "The United States welcomes the news that the OSCE-led trilateral contact group supported by Chancellor Merkel and President Hollande, Poroshenko, and Putin, reached agreement on a ceasefire and heavy weapons withdrawal in eastern Ukraine, and on the implementation of the September Minsk agreements. We particularly commend the diplomatic efforts of our European allies, Chancellor Merkel and President Hollande, pardon me, and their teams in making this agreement possible. Actions will be what matter now. The first test of this agreement and the prospects for a comprehensive settlement will be the full implementation of the ceasefire and the withdrawal of heavy weapons by all parties, the Ukraine, the separatists, and Russia." Now, Kerry's still sticking to the idea that the Russians actually have invaded the Ukraine. Now, I'm personally, guys, I'll be very honest, I personally doubt that. If you saw an invasion, you'd see a lot different than what you're seeing now. So, again, I don't know who's telling the truth here. I am, and I remain more suspicious of the American government than I do of the Russian government, and certainly suspicious of the current government that we put into power in Kiev. But wherever you stand on this, then listen to what he says. The first test of this agreement will be the first full implementation of the ceasefire and the withdrawal of heavy weapons by all parties. All the parties must show complete restraint in the run-up to the Sunday ceasefire, including an immediate halt to the Russian and separatist assault on Debaltseve and other Ukrainian towns. The parties have a long road ahead before achieving peace and the full restoration of the Ukraine's sovereignty. Here's a hint, Mr. Secretary. In the English language, we call it the Ukraine. The United States stands ready to assist in coordination with our European allies and partners. We will judge the commitment of Russia and the separatists by their actions, not their words. As we have long said, the United States is prepared to consider rolling back sanctions on Russia when the Minsk agreements of September 2014 and now this agreement are fully implemented. That includes a full ceasefire, withdrawal of all foreign troops and equipment from the Ukraine, the full restoration of Ukrainian control of the international border, and the release of all hostages. Now, that's hypocrisy because earlier this week we've just had stories appearing that the United States is sending paratroops into the Ukraine to train Ukrainians. So if you're going to say withdraw all foreign troops, that means Russian and American. All right? Now, we also come to the news, or welcome the news, that the government of the Ukraine and the IMF have reached an agreement that will allow the IMF to provide the Ukraine with $17.5 billion in financial assistance in support of economic reforms. This agreement will enable the Ukraine to continue implementing the reforms it needs to build a stronger, more prosperous, and democratic future for the people of the Ukraine. In other words, he's giving you all the language of what surrender to the IMF and the Western financial oligarchs really means. Peace, prosperity, covering it up with all of the language. And that was his statement. And now Zero Hedge goes on to ask this question. So Crimea, which was not mentioned, and whose, quote, annexation by Russia so infuriated the Western leaders, is now Vlad's to keep. In other words, It is interesting that Secretary of the State John Kerry did not mention the Crimean Peninsula. That was left out. So I suspect, perhaps, that maybe, as one person who sent that Zero Hedge article to me put it, that the United States just blinked. Now the question is, why did the United States just blink? And here is where this last week has seen such a flurry of differing theories, one of which, of course, is being that the Europeans are close to the point of being totally fed up with the United States, the sanctions regime. It's hurting their economies as well. And so there's been the theory out, and I'm going to toss it out there for you to consider. There's been the theory that all of this is an attempt by the United States not to cement the EU, but to break it up. All right? I'm kind of on the fence right now, but here's one that came out that I really have to talk about. Now, let me put it into a little more context for you. Earlier in this last week and the week before, we've also had two other significant things happen. The United States Congress has extended an invitation to Pope Francis I to address a joint session of Congress. This will be the first time that a Bishop of Rome has ever addressed, in that capacity, addressed a joint session of the United States Congress. So that is an historical first. And again, the question is why? Now, this same week, something else happened, and that was Patriarch Kirill II of Moscow, also for the first time in history, a sitting Patriarch of Moscow, has addressed the Russian State Duma. So look what's happening. You have more or less the quote-unquote big troublemaker of the BRICS bloc, Russia, inviting the head of the Russian Orthodox Church to speak before his parliament. And I'm suspecting, folks, that this is a direct response to the invitation to Francis to speak to the United States. Why? Because if you recall, the model that's being set up, in my opinion, is Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations. And one of the civilizations he thinks is a clear, distinct civilization is the Orthodox civilization, Edom Est, led by Russia. All right. So in other words, I think that you're seeing a little bit of this clash of civilizations going on here, and the churches are now aligning themselves with these big power blocks. Why? I don't know, but I do strongly suspect that one ultimate objective of that alignment is that we're going to see the papacy calling for, or it will be suggested by other parties, that the papacy take some sort of formal political role in adjudicating the interreligious disputes in Israel, Palestine, and so on. In other words, they'll want an internationally recognized, quote-unquote, neutral party to step into that mess and try and adjudicate it. I think this is what is being set up long term. So let's go back to Russia. Why did the United States apparently just blink? Because remember, there is no mention of the Crimean Peninsula and the quote-unquote Russian annexation of that territory in Secretary Kerry's press statement. All right. Now, there's another story that appeared just earlier this week as all this is going on, and that is that Putin apparently is threatening to release satellite data that will prove that 9/11 is an inside job. Now, this story ran in PRAVDA, and already there's all sorts of websites in the Western media, alternative media, and particularly in the United States, that are taking this and running with it. Oh, well, the satellite data is going to prove mini nukes or controlled demolitions or something like that. In other words, in my opinion, the satellite data is going to, in their opinion, it's going to buttress their favored theories of how the Twin Towers came down. And of course, those of you who know me know that I'm not in either of those camps. But here's the problem. PRAVDA is the source that ran this story. And let me read what a couple of paragraphs from this article that PRAVDA ran. And Alex Jones picked up on this. Veterans Today in the United States picked up on this. And this is not the best translation. Quote, American experts believe that despite the fact that relations between the United States and Russia reached the worst point since the Cold War, Putin caused Obama only small troubles so far. Analysts believe that this is the calm before the storm. Putin is going to hit once more, but he's going to hit hard. Russia is preparing for the release of evidence of the involvement of the United States government and intelligence services in the September 11th attacks. In the list of evidence included the satellite images from 9/11. So that's a key right there. It's not just satellite images, it's something else, all right? Russia proves that America is no stranger to the false flag terrorism against its own citizens in order to achieve a pretext for military intervention in foreign countries. In the case of the September 11th attacks, the evidence will be, quote, conclusive satellite imagery, unquote. If successful, the consequences of Putin's tactics would expose the U.S. government's secret terrorist policies. The government's credibility will be undermined and should bring about mass protests in the city, leading to an uprising, according to American analysts. All right, now, we all know that PRAVDA is one of those highly dubious sources. It's degenerated kind of to the standpoint of being the equivalent of a supermarket tabloid. But nonetheless, if PRAVDA is saying this, it still has those connections to the Russian Communist Party. It still has those connections to the Russian government. And this means that there may be something to this story, because this story appeared prior to Secretary of State John Kerry's press statement. And as the individual who sent me that Zero Hedge article suggested, did we just blink because there is some possibility that Putin was preparing to release Russian information about 9/11, which, to the extent that the PRAVDA story is reporting it, could go so far as to cause civil unrest in this country? I don't know. I doubt all that. But there's something going on behind the scenes, and it may have to do with 9/11 in working in conjunction with Merkel and Hollande. Now, that's huge right there, because what it's suggesting is that maybe, and please hear me out, that maybe during their private talks between President Putin, Chancellor Merkel, and President Hollande, that perhaps it was then that Mr. Putin shared some of that information with them and told them to tell Washington, if they don't want to see this getting out, go over there and convince them that it's time to take a more even-headed tone. I don't know. This is going to be a story to watch, folks. 9/11, the sanctions regime. Why did the Crimean Peninsula all of a sudden drop off the American radar? This is going to be something to watch in coming weeks. I'm almost convinced of it. Now, brief announcement. As many of you know, I had my car stolen. I had to get another vehicle. I appreciate your prayers. I'm still needing your prayers because of the situation involving all of that. Please keep me in your prayers for things to happen and for protection. I have not heard anything more about Georgianne Hughes, but I have heard that she apparently is eating better and gaining some weight. So that's good news. Please keep her in your prayers. That's it for this week's news and views from the Nefarium. A very strange one, folks. A lot to keep your eyes on. I think we're watching big things trying to be put into place. We're going to need to pay close attention from now on. I want to thank all of you for sending me so many articles about all this week. It's really been a breathtaking week. Anyway, thank you. God bless, and I'll see you on the flip side, everybody.